you, and I want to welcome you to the dissertation defense of Sharon, Kaplan, Berkeley.
Yes! Oh,
Probably don't need to say this, but I'm the program director for educational leadership. The title of Sharon's dissertation is The Development of Young Children's Social Identity in an Era of Digital Socialization Tools. Before I introduce Sharon's senior advisor, I want to give all those in attendance a sense of the format and procedure of this defense. The scheduling of the dissertation defense represents a high point along the continuum of many previous meetings with the doctoral candidate working closely with the senior advisor and other committee members. The scheduling of the defense affirms that substantive work has been produced during and between preceding meetings, and that the candidate is ready to defend the draft of the dissertation as submitted. The purpose of the defense is for the doctoral committee to consider chapter by chapter the dissertation in its entirety. At this defense, the committee's responsibility is to confirm that A, there is overall clarity and coherence to the study. B, the argument advanced in the dissertation is well crafted. C, the research methods, design, and analysis connect with the guiding questions. D, the research analysis has integrity. And E, there is significance to the study. The dissertation defense is open to the public. The public defense satisfies the requirement that doctoral students present their work. Those in attendance should view the proceedings as an opportunity to support Sharon and also become more informed about the dissertation topic. When doctoral students are present, and I'm so happy to see so many, it's an opportunity for them to observe and better understand the defense process so that they're better prepared for their own dissertation defenses. During the defense, there will be an opportunity for those in attendance to ask questions or follow up on other questions raised by committee members. Once the public portion of the process is concluded and closed by the senior advisor, the doctoral committee will move to another room and convene to determine the status of the dissertation. The doctoral committee has three options. One, it may approve the dissertation as to content and style as presented. Two, it may approve the dissertation with conditions and ask that minor revisions be completed. And three, the committee may ask that major revisions be completed before they approve the dissertation and sign off. After the committee has discussed the dissertation, the candidate will be summoned to join the committee to privately discuss the status of the dissertation. Once the dissertation is approved by the committee members, the program director, the PhD division director, and the dean of the Graduate School of Education sign the signature page. The student is then required to have their dissertation on bonded paper bound and submitted to the student advising office. So now I'd like to introduce Sharon's senior advisor, who will introduce the other members of the committee and also Sharon. Lisa Fiore, you're on.
Thank you, Dr. Poole. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you all, and it reminds me, as I'm often reminded, that even though a completed dissertation is found and often sits on a shelf in 2005, you'll see a whole bunch of them here at Lesley, but it represents the work that evolves over many years, and particularly the relationships that occur over those years. And so this cohort I know is a particularly close cohort. So, when one person sits at the table, it's really a testament to these relationships within the room, outside of the room. So just want to acknowledge that and express gratitude for all of that energy. And for those of you who are new to Lesley, welcome and welcome to the journey. My name is Lisa Fiore. I teach primarily early childhood education classes here at Lesley, which is why it was such a nice fit to work with Sharon. I'm teaching in class, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, most of my time. But I focus on social emotional learning and resisting the mandates that are handed down from offices in our country, and just really trying to support students as whole learners. And I'll let the other representatives on the committee introduce themselves because they can do it better than I can.
Great. I'm Susan Patterson, welcome, and I teach in the Graduate School of Education, mostly technology courses. So I'm happy to have worked with Sharon on this project.
I'm Deborah Murphy, and I am the Early Childhood Ed Program Coordinator and Professor at Cape Cod Community College, and I did my PhD here at Lesley about my research was about teacher education.
All right, so now we'll turn it over to Sharon.
I'm Sharon. Before I talk about myself, I'd like to, with the permission that I've received from Dr. Gould and Lisa, in the Jewish tradition, there is a tradition to dedicate learning in memory of, here come the tears, in memory of somebody, and I never really bought into that. I never really identified with it. But in Paul's class, and I'm really glad you're here, Paul, in Paul's class on leadership, we had to record a voice, what do we call them? Voice third on different types of leaders, and I was sitting in Cape Town in our house, and I suddenly realized that one of those leaders was my dad. And my cohort here heard that voice thread and commented on it, and Paul heard it. And it really resonated with me this morning when I came, that I would like to dedicate whatever learning happens here, pass, fail, etc., whatever learning, in honor of my late father. He was a great leader. He taught me that the only thing one never ever loses is one's education and one's knowledge. And so whatever I've gained from this amazing experience is in honor of you, Dad. And I want to thank my cohort for being with me, and my great team of educators, and my family who are all there watching me, because you guys supported me in a period where I moved from grieving to growth, and I'm a different person now, so thank you. Okay. Now I will introduce myself. So I grew up in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and I immigrated to Israel in 1982. My first experiences in Israel were working as a volunteer in a kibbutz in an early childhood education classroom, and I fell in love with early childhood, and I discovered that what I really believe today is at the stage that you can work with children in the socio-emotional stage of life, and where you can teach life skills is in early childhood. And I believe that that is one of the roles that an educator has in general, but especially in early childhood. And as the years have developed, I've experienced the role that a teacher has in socio-emotional growth. I think that academic learning is great, but I think that to survive in today's world, we need to have social and emotional skills. As the years went by, I evolved into teacher education and teacher training. And once again, I saw that in guiding students to become teachers and in guiding students to work with young children, the socio-emotional aspect of education is something that is modeled and felt and constructed within the classroom and not really read in the book. And so as the years have gone by, I've evolved into what I believe is a social constructivist educator. And I was highly influenced by Vygotsky, but I have to admit that I got to Vygotsky after I experienced the intense experiences of being socially in the classroom. So I got to the theory from the practice. And those experiences or that approach influenced my choice of using an ethnographic approach, because ethnography goes into the natural environment, and I think that children in the natural environment are people to learn from, people to listen to, and people to respect. It was very, very important to me to choose an approach that worked with children and got meaning from children, and not worked on children or about children or over children or examined children. And I think in the whole process, the children's voices were heard, and I think in this process, I gave a lot of expression to the high respect that I hold for young children. What else do you want me to say about this? I think it's enough.
Yeah, that's great. And in fact, the way the flow will go, because we'd like to cover all 5 chapters of the dissertation, the committee members have all written up a few questions that touch upon each of the different chapters. So I'll start with chapter 1 to ask you this question. So there are many biases about the use of technology in education, particularly early childhood education, and many ways that people judge adults who support children's use of technology. So can you explain a little bit about your own experience as a teacher educator, and a parent, and how that influenced your topic?
Okay. I think as a teacher educator, and a parent, I'm all rolled up in one. So I don't want to differentiate, I don't want to categorize it. I will like to bring a few examples, but I think that all those different experiences of who I am as a person come into the classroom with me, come into the home with me. I think I bring it all together. So how it influenced my topic, there were certain ways. We were in Susan's class, or we were online in Susan's class. We were studying technology, and I was driving home one day, and I was driving towards my house, which is in a cul-de-sac, and there's a nursery school, 3 classrooms, early childhood center, right there, and I slowed down towards my house. My code of heard this, sorry, I'm repeating. Slowed down towards my house, and there was a young mother taking 3 children out of the car, and for the children to cross the road, I had to stop. I stopped, and I watched this young mother with her phone doing this and taking her children out of the car. She wasn't focusing on her children, she was focusing on her phone. And while I was watching, I suddenly thought, they must have been 5, 3, and a baby. These children are seeing a mother who's about to separate from them from the whole day, totally involved in something in a screen, communicating with someone in that screen, and not communicating with them who are holding on to her. And the thought occurred to me, what is their impressions of this world in which they are now growing up in? What is their impressions of how we relate to one another in a world that they have not known anything else except the screen, and how they interact, or this digital device, with each other? And it was when we were doing, you guys will remember, it was when we were doing the unit that Susan called enthusiasts or skeptics. And I was a skeptic, and I wasn't sure where I felt, and I didn't know where to go. And that incident happened, and it made me really upset for those kids that this was the relationship that their mother was showing to them. Thanks for coming. So that was the first incident that jarred me. And then at this time that I was trying to study online, I also was very aware that now I was in the screen and I was studying online, and for years I've gotten upset with my kids being on a screen and cutting us off. And all of a sudden I discovered this amazing world of a screen and what goes on behind it, and my friends who are now here were friendships that I was making on the screen. And I was, as a teacher, trying to transform the learning in the classroom, because in a world where there are digital devices and digital technology, you should be up there teaching it, especially if the young children that you're teaching are involved in digital devices. So I think my whole world was being involved with these devices, and then I was hearing people say negative things about screens, and young parents questioning how much their children should be on a screen, and looking towards the early childhood educators whose classroom their children are in for advice on how to work with a digital device. And I watched my own son befriend somebody, a classmate, by playing online after school hours, and in school hours playing on the playground. So there was this whole complementary positives and negatives and enthusiasts and good stuff and going on. And I suddenly realized that it's not black or white, and that we need to understand that we're living in a digital era, we're living in a digital culture, and just as we learned to adapt to other cultures and taught our children skills of navigating a world, so we need to embrace this and learn how to do it. And I think in my, which is for other subjects, mute your mics. I think somewhere in my, I say somewhere along on the way that we need to understand that we're in a digital culture and how we cope with it. And that was more what set me about going on this way. I think that we've passed the stage of denying it. It's here to stay. So that's what got me going. And I'm convinced that it's here to stay, and that our role now is to teach our children how to use it positively.
Okay, so in chapter 2 in your lit review, I was interested in, you speak about Kathy Davidson's view of participatory learning, and how she defines it is that technology enables students to participate in their own learning and to contribute to the learning process. And so she's one influence, but you also speak about Mishra and Mehta, who say that technology doesn't fundamentally change anything. It's just nice and it helps. Mm-hmm. So after your observations, where do you fall on that spectrum of participatory, enabling students to really change their own learning, or it's nice to have?
In the early childhood education classroom that I observed, that I did this research, the particular school that I worked in is a digital environment. They claim that they're a Google school. And in the classroom, there is a smart board, there is a laptop computer for the teacher, there are 2 computers, and there are 2 iPads that the children use freely to upload their work to a digital portfolio. And their parents immediately receive emails to see the work that they've submitted. So, on the one hand, I really experienced how a teacher transforms the learning and adds to the learning of 5-year-olds, they were kindergarten children, in an environment where the children are playing, they're playing outdoors, they're playing with a train, they're building with Lego, they're drawing, but the digital learning tools have become fully integrated into the classroom. On the other hand, as you quote, Mishra and Mehta say that it hasn't really done much to change it, and that it's still who the teacher is as a person. The literature also says that the role of the teacher has changed, and the teacher today is not the knower of all things, but the facilitator of how to do things. During a lot of our classes, we talked about the 21st century learning tools. And we discussed this a lot in the last 6 months of the development of my dissertation. What exactly are 21st century learning tools? And I think that where I've learned and what I feel are that in today's world, where there are digital devices invading everything that we do and a part of everything that we do, in order to teach our children skills in which to integrate fully into today's society, we need to integrate learning devices into the classroom. When we talk about 21st century skills, what are they? I define them together with you as skills within which a child or a person can navigate their way within a digital culture. Different people have defined them differently. I think from my research, from watching these young children play and discovering that within the classroom, they elevate their learning using a smartboard and using an iPad, but in their outdoor play, they still play tag, and they still argue about who's going to be the tagger, and they still want to play different traditional children's games. I think that it's an essential skill that children need to learn, and I think that it's a skill that parents need to understand that part of their responsibility now is to teach children how to use digital devices.
All right, so in a lit review, as you're all learning and know already, you're trying to cover so much territory, and your particular topic straddled social development, human development, and leadership, technology, and tools. I don't even know the vocabulary. Susan's the master of it. Thank you. So I'd be curious if you could just speak to for a little bit, where you saw synergies or where things came together around social development, perhaps, and children's uses of technology. And if you had covered every domain, you'd have a 1,000-page dissertation. So how you made choices about the literature review that you ended up with.
Okay, I think, as you said, Lisa, if I had covered everything, I'd still be sitting in the library and I would still be writing my chapter 2, and I would never have gotten into chapter 3. So part of the choices was things that I learned last year when I was at Alyssa's defense, that your chapter 2 must support your chapter 5 and support your methodology and your questions. And a lot of my guiding questions, can I read them? So my 3 guiding questions were, how does engaging with digital tools influence the social interactions of young children? Are there various ways online, offline social environments influence face-to-face social peer group formation and functioning? How does relating to others through digital tools influence the developing social identities of young children? I think my guiding questions became the framework for my literature review. And when I started to read the literature, which I definitely started for my QP, so I was reading for 2 years, I defined it closer and closer to the time according to the questions. Social interactions is something that we read about a lot. Social interactions were first defined in sociology by Goffman. And when you read about social interactions in early childhood, it immediately leads you in the literature to friendship. Everybody talks about how children interact in the classroom, and an interaction can just be that they push each other, or they chat to each other, or they get upset with each other. But when you get deeper into the literature, social interactions are the building tools for friendships, and friendships in the early childhood environment teach children how to interact with others and with the world. So I focused a lot on friendship. I focused a lot on peer culture because I wanted to understand the social identity of a child and what makes them acceptable within their peers. And that led me to reading a lot of Caruso's work and a lot about friendship. And anybody that writes, or anywhere in the literature that you review friendship, we know that play is the tool that enables children to make friends with each other. And by playing with one another, they learn to react and interrelate with one another, and they become friends. And I don't know if I'm going to quote him correctly, but Caruso says that anyway, for kids, it's not about the friendship, it's about who you're playing with. The kid that you're playing with is the kid that you're friends with at that moment. So that guided a lot of the review on friendship. And from that, I understood that play was an important part of my review. And play was one of the themes that helped me lead into the whole digital culture, because digital play or online play or video games is the area of the literature that people are so concerned about, that we're not playing outdoors, but we're playing digitally, or we're playing online, or is Minecraft so good or so bad? So, and then what brought it all together was my intense interest in identity, and whether in this digital era, our children's identity is being influenced by what they are playing, or what they are seeing, or who they are interacting with. And that brought me to the piece on identity.
So in chapter 3, you discussed your research design, but can you talk about how you can use the photo solicitation interview strategy with children?
Okay.
And how did that strategy work in terms of supporting your data collection?
Okay. Okay, so when I read in Creswell about photo elicitation, and I think there's some witnesses over here, I jumped up and down in the classroom, and I said, this is early childhood, this is what I need to do, this is what I'm going to do. Because developmentally appropriate practice teaches that children in early childhood education learn through their 5 senses. They go out into the world, they touch, they feel, they hear, they smell, and they taste the world, and that is how they totally make meaning. And constructing meaning with tactile tools, toys, pictures is an essential part of developmentally appropriate practice. So pictures for me was an obvious way of provoking a conversation. At the same time, I was aware that Reggio Media also talks about provoking a discussion or using a provocative to get an activity going. So I chose to use photographs because it just felt to me that it was totally correct. I'm going to show them in a minute because they're part of the whole. Once I'd understood that it worked for me in early childhood to bring in pictures, and these are the photographs that I chose, then I had to choose. I felt that it was essential to choose photographs that supported the questions of my research study, and photographs based on developmentally appropriate practice principles that the child could relate to the photograph, the child could identify with what was going on in the photograph, and the photograph would provoke a discussion that would support my question. So I chose photographs, as you can see, of young children. I chose photographs of young children at play because that is what my literature review stated, that they interact and understand the world through what they're doing and through their activities. I then had read in different methodologies of how to use photo elicitation, that you could present one photograph, you could present a lot of photographs, or you could present opposing photographs to provoke a discussion. And I chose the idea of opposing photographs to see whether the children would identify with my question about online, offline play. So, for example, I took this photograph of playing outside, offline play, and I showed it with this photograph playing on the iPad, online play. The teacher in the classroom the classroom was built as a developmentally appropriate classroom with learning centers, and the teacher helped me facilitate using the photographs by giving me a center. So it was called Miss Sharon Center, and in Miss Sharon Center, we looked at photographs and we talked about them. I think when I reflected back and I wrote about this, my early childhood education approach influenced without me planning the way I worked with the photographs. I asked the children if they would like to choose the photograph they wanted to talk about. I asked the children who wanted to begin the conversation, and the flow of the conversation was guided by the children. I sat there very quietly, plodding or questioning, but listening more than anything else. When they had had enough, I asked them if they wanted to take other photographs. If in the middle of the conversation they wanted to leave, they left. So I think the conversation was very much supported by the pictures, but the conversation was also supported by the children edging each other on. The next stage happened without me anticipating it, and it had been something that I'd read about in the literature, that there are people who use in research photo elicitation as a tool by giving cameras to children and asking them to go and photograph certain themes like houses, and then basing the interviews on the pictures that the children had taken. And in one of my interviews, a young child said to me, "Miss Sharon, can I bring in pictures tomorrow of me playing at home?" And that really excited me, and I spoke to the teacher, and it led to the children bringing in photographs of them playing at home that they chose over the weekend, and a whole new series of interviews and discussions based on the photographs that the children brought in. So that's how it supported my research. And the interesting thing that happened with the pictures that the children brought in was that all the pictures that the children brought in were of them playing with toys. And when I asked them, they all said, "I brought this picture because I wanted to show it with you. I brought this picture because I wanted to share with you. This is Baby Hat, and I wanted you to see Baby Hat." Or, "These are my favorite magnets, I wanted you to see them." So I was trying to validate whether the child had chosen the photograph or whether the parent had sent the photograph. And I got a sense that those children had chosen the photographs, but so that's where it ends, yeah. And because of ethical reasons, I can't show you those photographs, but they were there. Each child sent 3 photographs, and they were all playing with toys.
So, sticking with chapter 3 for a minute, could you speak to what you learned as a result of the methods and methodology, and particularly how you dealt with your own researcher bias or just your human bias during the process and the design? And perhaps what you would change if you were to do a replication of the study, or what you might suggest to someone else who's about to embark.
Can we do 3 questions at once?
Do as
First,
many
my
as you
researcher
want.
bias,
Whatever you
and then
want.
what I would change.
Anything at all.
Okay, so researcher bias. I was very aware of my researcher bias in the sense that I believe in children and I believe in what they say, and I had to be careful not to let the children overrun one another, in the sense that I was working with a group, or the research took place in a classroom with an international cohort of young children who all spoke English as their first language, but they had different ways of talking to each other and talking, and I had to make sure that there was some kind of equality amongst the children. So to the degree that I believe that the child should lead the learning and the child should make the meaning, I did sometimes interact with them and ask others to make space. Researcher bias as far as being an early childhood educator. I had to take myself out of the teacher role. That was the part that was hardest. I had to be a fly on the wall. I had to be an observer. I had to constantly say to the children when they asked me for, if they could go to the washroom, if they could do certain things, that I was not the authoritative leader of the classroom. I was just there with them. There was a time when the classroom teacher was ill and there was a SAP coming in, and I suggested that I wouldn't come in that day to research because I was aware that I would then be in the seniority position and that the children would turn to me to ask me how to do things, or the SAP would ask me how to do things, and I stayed home that day. As a social constructivist, I think my researcher bias led me to wanting to be there more part of the day, in the sense of when they were outdoor, and I made sure that I was there from the beginning to the end. What would I change? Was that the next part of the
If
question?
anything, sure. Or suggest to someone else about to embark on a similar
Yeah. So there was a part of the researcher bias that I learned a lot about, and that maybe I would suggest to somebody else. In my role as a teacher trainer, every classroom that I worked in has a dramatic play area, a place for socio-dramatic play, blocks and areas in which they can pretend play, and pretend play is an important part of early childhood and kids growing up, and we see a lot of who children are in their pretend play. And when I was trying to look at online, offline play, I really imagined that I was going to observe children dressing up and playing house and playing mom and dad and playing doctor in the socio-dramatic area of the classroom, and this would feed my research. When I walked into the classroom that I had permission to work in, it was a far more what we call an academic classroom, and there was no socio-dramatic area. And that was my researcher bias hit in the face, because I just assumed that every classroom supported socio-dramatic play. So my bias made me change direction, and for my research, I observed a lot of the outdoor play where there was a lot of socio-dramatic and pretend play. But if I were to advise somebody else, I would check out the environment, or I would make sure that you could do the quick switch that I did and support your study in a different way. That's the change, I would say.
Okay, let's move on to chapter 4 and your findings. And you're very close in the last question to addressing one of the concerns that I have, and it's about that specific population. You were working in a classroom of native English speakers, sitting in the middle of Israel, and I just wonder, and in a private school, if you feel like that specific population had any influence on your findings, or if you would find the same findings within a different population.
So my research approach was a mini ethnographic case study. And I think the answer to your question is that this was a case study on a particular population of 10 English-speaking international children who live at home with parents who only one parent has permission to work in Israel, and therefore one parent is at home. So these children in this case study are experiencing a different environment to what other children who have two working parents would be experiencing. And I have no doubt that that influenced my findings. My interest would be now to replicate the study in a population of children who are Hebrew speaking, in a population of children who have two working parents, and in different areas, socioeconomic areas, because as you stated, it was a private school. So that's a different socioeconomic level of child coming from a different type of home who supports them differently to what it would be in another population. I think an interesting study would be to compare a comparison between different case studies of 5-year-olds in different areas growing up with different environments. And it fascinates me to go in, and we've talked about this, to go in to families where both parents are working.
Great, thank you. So you told us that you spoke to the children at some point about your findings. Can you talk about what their responses were, and also how did their response inform your thinking about your research?
Can I share my experience when I went back to? Okay, so one of the important things in a qualitative study is to validate your research, and one of the things that we say for it to be ethically correct is to go back and share your findings with those that you've interviewed. So if you're interviewing an adult, it's very easy to call them up, or you can send back what you've written up and they can read it and say whether they agree or they don't agree. I really wanted to validate my findings, and I had promised the children when I was introduced to them that I would share with them what we discovered together. And my first meeting in the classroom, we sat in a circle and I explained who I was, and I showed them pictures of my cohort as my classmates as they are, showed them the picture of us on the wall, and I showed them pictures of us in the classroom, and I explained to them why I was doing research and why it was important for them, and that whatever they told me was confidential. I wouldn't share it with anybody, but I would share it with them. And because I trusted them and they trusted me, it was very important for me to somehow go back and tell them what I'd found. But I had to find a child-friendly, developmentally appropriate language and way to do it. So, while I'd been working in the classroom, every Monday morning at 8:30, they had a mysterious reader. Mystery reader would arrive, knock on the door, say good morning in some kind of a funny voice, and the kids would guess who the mystery reader was, and was generally a parent. When I had all my findings and I had submitted them, I approached the teacher and I suggested that maybe I could be the mystery reader one Monday morning at 8:30. So one Monday morning in the middle of May, I knocked on the door and the teacher goes, "Oh, there's a mystery reader. Mystery reader, can you say good morning?" And I said good morning. And one of the kids, before I walked in, yelled, "Ha! It's the one who brought us those photos." So that was kind of validating that the experience had been something that they remembered and had touched them. And then when I came in, they go, "Oh yeah, it's Miss Sharon, the one who we talked to in her learning center." So I read them because I was mystery reader. I read them the book Goodnight iPad, which I can read to you later. And it's a great book about digital devices and how it's a parody on Goodnight Moon, and it's a great book about how digital devices have invaded our culture. And when I'd finished talking about it, I said to them, "So kindergarten, I'm here to tell you what I learned. So this is what I said to them. These are the things I learned from you." And as I started to say to them, "These are the things I learned from you," I'll read them. Can I read them? Each child, the children started to say, yeah, we agree, or "Yeah, but." So kindergarten, these are the things I learned from you. You play online interactive video games alone or with your family. That was one of the greatest findings, that they were either alone or with their family. These children played in social networks online, but they never interacted together socially online. You do not play online interactive games with your classmates. On weekends and at home, you play with toys. Some of your toys are from the movies. On weekends, you watch movies on Netflix. You only watch Netflix and play on your tablet or your computer with your mother or your father's permission. They really agree with that one. Sometimes you play games like Expelliarmus from Harry Potter. You love to play tag, and you love to use the rhyme bubble gun. You guys know that. I didn't know that game. Right. After each finding, they all agreed, they cheered. They wanted to tell me more stories to do with their finding, and I kind of had to cut them because I was there to be the mystery reader. So when I left the classrooms, I really felt like I'd validated my research and that they'd approved in a way that only children could approve. But it was a very nice feeling to know that they identified with what I'd said. Then, about 2 weeks later, I was out in town, and a young girl comes running up to me, Miss Sharon, and she introduces me to her mom. And her mom said, "Oh, we heard about these wonderful pictures, and we've been hearing about what you've done in the classroom, and thank you for choosing our classroom." So I realized then that it had also somehow gotten home. They had talked about it, because kids come home when they're 5 and they tell their mom and dad what they did. And so it validated for me that not only did the children agree with what I'd found, but that they discussed it with the parents, or the parents knew that I was coming into the classroom, not only from signing the permission forms, but from talking about it.
Great. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Great, and on to chapter 5.
Susan, I wish that writing this had been as quick.
I know. This is looking good, isn't it? Right? So, in your results, and this is related to the last question I asked, and I agree with you, looking at different demographics would yield different results and would be really, really, really interesting. However, now I wanted you to speculate, what if you did a similar experience with the same children a year later or 2 years later, when they are fluent readers and more, they will probably use social media and the digital devices even more. How do you think your results will change?
Okay, so the research says that children aged 6 and 7 feel that their mobile phones are essential for their socializing, because that is how they make arrangements, get together, interact with one another. I saw 2 things that in this research project that are probably going to influence what I feel. The outdoor play area where the kindergarten would play during recess or outdoor time was also shared by the first graders and the second graders. And many a time the first graders and the second graders were on the playground when the kindergarten arrived, and they would overlap for a period of 10 or 15 minutes, and then the second and first graders would go into the classroom and the kindergarten, and the play changed. If the kindergarten came onto the playground while the first and second graders were there, the play was far more influenced by games or movies that they see on Netflix or that they play. The only time that I ever observed them playing a game of Harry Potter was when they were first and second graders on the playground, and they started to pretend that they were characters from Harry Potter and say all kinds of spells and things that I had asked my children what they were. And so I realized that the play changed. So in answer to your question, I think that once they learn to read and write, digital devices have a different role. I think as they get older, their play is influenced differently by what they see. I heard the children in the kindergarten when I interviewed them talking about how their elder siblings play Minecraft and don't let them play. I heard them talk about how their moms will text one another to make social arrangements for each other, and they can't do it yet, but their elder siblings can do that. So I think that as they grow older, it's going to have a far more of an influence. I found that the kindergarten kids still play traditional outdoor games such as tag, which was my greatest finding, that their social identity is definitely connected to who's going to play tag and who's the tagger, and far more so than anything to do with a digital device. But I think that as they get older, it's going to change, and that's the interesting next piece of research. Where, in what stage, if we look at developmental stages of childhood, and if we look at development, their development is going from stage to stage in advancing the child. At what stage in their development does the digital interaction influence their identity more, and where do they start identifying with it? And I think it's an interesting piece to look at, because that same device, that same tablet or that same smartphone is used as a learning device, and is used as a socializing device, and is used as a communicating device. And once they can read and write, they're going to use that device as a communicating device and a socializing device, not just as an entertainment device, which the children that I worked with did.
Interesting.
And so, in terms of implications, what would you say the message is for administrators and leaders in the field of early childhood education? And how can your insights impact the practice of early childhood educators?
Okay. I learned from the classroom in which I did this research that just as we teach young children skills in life and boundaries, we talk about boundaries, we talk about independent thinking. I watched how this educator is teaching these children to integrate digital devices into the learning, but with boundaries. How they learn to use an iPad to upload or to communicate, but they're still playing outdoors. So I think one of the implications is to understand and accept that digital devices can be a very positive learning tool, but just as with anything else, we need to find the middle lane, we need to find the golden path, we need to understand how to use the tool. I definitely learned, and I think one of the greatest implications here is that in today's parenting role, parents need to understand that everything that they do with the digital device, they are modeling for their children, as with anything else. So if that mother who stimulated me to start thinking about how her children are seeing her is aware that her children are seeing her fully on a screen and not saying goodbye to them, what does that do to her? And as an early childhood educator, I believe the role is to show the mother or to show the parent or to show those who are educating children how they are modeling, as with anything else in early childhood education, how they are modeling the use of digital devices or the integration of a digital device into our world. And just as educators may use digital devices in the classroom, there is some dissonance with parents feeling that screens are not something for education. I think the role of the education, of the early childhood educator, and especially the leaders, is to show parents, is to show others, is to teach us, just like I learned positives about technology in this whole long journey. I think that we can all, as educators, go out and share that. But I think that the first thing is to accept that digital technology is here to stay. And as anything that changes, if we learn to deal with the change, if we look at our immunity to change, and we look at our assumptions, and we discover that we educate ourselves for our assumptions, and we discover how to use digital devices, I think that's the major implication here. And that we have to understand that it's a changing society and things are dynamic. And parenting and educating in today's world is not what it was 20 years ago or 40 years ago, and it probably isn't what it's going to be in 10 years' time.
Thank you.
So you've touched on this. This is our final committee question, unless we have follow-ups. There are always pieces or traces of information that do not fit within the bounds of a dissertation for a whole host of reasons. So could you tell us a bit about your ideas for future research or presentations or other ways of communicating your work?
I think other ways of communicating my work would be definitely, as we've said already, definitely taking the tool, because I love the tool. And I think that using the tool of photo elicitation of photographs was fascinating. And I think that the part that I loved the most was being in the classroom. That's my personal bias. But using photographs that children took themselves was fascinating. And I would probably like to try and use the methodology that was suggested in the literature that I didn't bring up, by giving children cameras and letting them take pictures themselves and seeing what they did, what they do. And I would like to replicate this in different populations, as we've said, because I think that the knowledge that we'll gain from that is different. And I think that it's a culture, as we say, we called it a digital culture, and I think that a digital culture refers to the integration of digital devices in our lifestyle. But I think that every culture within which we live looks at a digital culture differently. And it would be interesting to replicate the same study in different universal or environmental contexts and cultures.
Right. So if we do have some time for any questions from anyone in the room who'd like to ask. You're in charge.
Are you in charge? Can I stand?
Whatever.
I can't sit in here. Okay. Sure.
So you mentioned that the children each wanted 3 pictures of themselves with their toys. I'm wondering if any of the pictures appeared as if they took it themselves, like with a device?
That's a very interesting question. As if they took a selfie?
Yeah.
No, but they were all taken by their parents. But the population that I worked with, the participating children, specifically commented many times that computers are for parents, that they're only allowed to use their mom's cell phone to watch movies. They constantly expressed boundaries of using digital devices. So it never even occurred to me, because I was so immersed in the project at that moment, that they would take the picture. It occurred to me that the parent might be directing the picture, because there was such a role here of parent boundaries coming out in the voices of the children.
And were any of them in pictures with other children or other adults?
No, for ethical reasons we asked that they wouldn't be, because the parents had signed permission for their children to participate. They hadn't signed permission for the siblings to participate or for anybody else. So we stipulated in the letter that went down to the parents that it should be only of the child. And I never shared the pictures of any of the children with each other. Like, it was never, when the child spoke about the picture, it was a one-on-one elicitation interview. It wasn't a group interview unless they said that they would be prepared to show each other the pictures, and that was also for ethical purposes.
Do you consider the setting for eliciting this information to have been a factor? I wonder, for example, if you had met in some other context and elicited the information.
Yes.
How you might think that it would be different. Would you have done something different as the researcher then? What was the effect of doing this in a classroom setting as opposed to some other context?
So initially, I had hoped to trace those children, the same children, in the classroom setting and in the home setting, and then to compare what happened between the classroom and the home. And by going into the home, I'd hope to get a deeper insight into what the children were experiencing. But the parents didn't give me permission. I requested it. I didn't get permission. I believe that if I'd gone into the home setting, I probably would have experienced far more natural play. And I definitely think that being in the context of the classroom had an influence. But I will say that with this specific case study, in this group of 10 children, as an international group who are transient, they're a community. And so when they had play dates and they talked about their play dates, they went together with their moms and their siblings. So a lot of the research and the stories that came out in the classroom spoke about the family and the home and the community. So it did give me some kind of insight into that other context. But I think that researching only in the classroom context definitely significantly influenced my findings. And I think that I revealed the voice of the child. And I specifically used in vivo coding because I wanted the voice of the child and I wanted the words of the children. And I think in early childhood, that's essential. I think as adults, we ruin it when we start to change it. I wanted to use the word corrupt, but then. So I think that to a degree it was influenced, but because I used in vivo and I took it from the child, being in the classroom was a lot of who they were. And that classroom space is a far more natural space for them because they're there for many hours.
So do you still think there's reason to refer to it as social identity as opposed to school identity?
Yes, because these children socialize within the community of their families. I'm going to ask you differently. If the research had been done in a broader environment of a school that was 35 kids and I'd taken 10 kids out of it and they had 2 working parents and they were integrated into the society, then it would be a school identity. But because this particular case study focused only on a group of children who are transient in Jerusalem, who play together, socialize together, whose parents socialize together, they come to school on a minibus together in a van. Their whole day and their lifestyle is different. I think that, yes, it's their social identity. Yeah.
This is about the photo elicitation as well in terms of methodology.
Mm-hmm.
I have two thoughts. One, I'd like to ask you about in choosing the provocation. Did you have to use prompts in order to help children with the use of the photos? And in terms of the environment and how children move within the environment in that age group, was it organic? They came to you as they saw fit, or was you set it up?
Okay, so let's start with, they came to me as they saw fit. I integrated into the culture of the classroom. So when it was learning center time, the children chose which learning center they wanted to go to, and whoever wanted to come to my learning center would come. The way that the classroom was structured is that 4 children are allowed, those are the laws of the classroom, to go to each center. So 4 children would come, we'd work. When they'd had enough or when a space became open, another child would come in. I totally started into the culture of the classroom. Okay? Prompts. I used visual learning strategies. I based the protocol on what visual learning strategies say. Visual learning strategies were developed in order to help children in art education understand and look at pictures and learn from photographs and art. It was developed here in Boston. So I had 3 questions. What do you see? How do you know that? Is there anything else you want me to know? Or is there anything else you want to say? So the what do you see was very descriptive, and they would talk about what they saw. The how do you know that, or why are you saying that, was the part where they would use metacognition, and that was the part that revealed the most about who they are and how they see and what their experiences are. So I'll just give you an example. One of the kids said, "Why is she playing on an adult computer?" And I said, "What's an adult computer?" And she said, "In that picture, it's an adult computer. You're not allowed to touch adult computers." So she really revealed to me her understanding and what was going on in her home and her boundaries of adult computers. And then the conversation ensued about adult computers. Okay. So yes, I used the protocol and I used visual learning strategies.
Can I just add to the first part, when they're coming into the learning center, let's say for children, did you keep track of how they came in and if the same children came back more often than others?
Yeah, no. They all had a turn. They all had a turn, but they would sometimes come back in the middle and go, leave and go and come and go.
I'm curious, presentation of images. Do you use actual photos versus an iPad or a digital tool? I'm just curious as to why you went that route.
I didn't want to bias using a digital device if I was researching online or offline. The classroom didn't use digital devices in learning center time, and once I was starting into learning center time, I wanted it to be uniform I didn't want that there was a computer to attract them more or less. I wanted it just to slot in quietly. But it was more because I wanted to provoke a discussion and I didn't want to prejudice a digital device because that's what I was researching. Steve.
So when you were first asked about findings, you really responded by talking about the children's behaviors. Describe those, behaviors. But what I want to get a sense of, and maybe it's been covered, I just didn't get it, is what are the bigger findings regarding the digital media and socialization? But in what ways do these tools influence social identity?
They don't.
So,
okay, so let me explain to you.
That's a major finding that
explain
needs to be clearly said.
These particular children, and I want to reiterate, I absolutely believe that these findings are based on a case study of children who have a parent at home, and parents, and this was expressed constantly by the children, who have very strict boundaries. Parents who are very interactive with their children on weekends. Parents who are at home. Okay? These children socialized and had digital interactions influencing the way that they socialized in the classroom environment during transitions from activity to activity and at snack time or lunchtime. At snack time and lunchtime, they would talk about Minions, Star Wars, Darth Vader, all kinds of conversations that were influenced by movies that they watched on Netflix. And they constantly talked about Netflix, and they had arguments about Netflix. One of the findings that was 100% unexpected by me was that every single one of these children has Netflix, and they all watch it. And when they're alone and they want to be entertained, they're watching movies. However, when they go outdoors to play in the playground, they play tag. So the answer to your question of where it influences their identity is that it influences their identity in their free time, in the sense that in their conversations and in their make-believe with each other, when they want to have a social conversation and be in the word of in the group, involved in the conversation, they need to have watched the movie, or they need to be able to identify with the character in the movie. When they had a few learning sessions, when they had spelling sessions, and they were learning about the letter D, and they had to bring in characters or any kind of tangible representation about D, they brought in Darth Vader, Donald Duck, and Dory from the movie. So they brought in movie characters. I found that when they interact with one another and they identify with one another, their conversations emerged out of movies. Their play had traces of characters in movies, but they didn't identify with one another because they were movie characters. It facilitated their conversations, so they could sit at lunchtime just like we sitting around here and talk to one another because I saw Star Wars 3 and Star Wars 8 is coming out in Israel, and another kid goes, no, I'm an expert, there's no Star Wars 8. But when they play, and they want to play together in the outdoors, and 5-year-olds need to play together, and they don't want to be left out, they didn't play Harry Potter. That was the second graders. They played tag. And so I think that the answer to your question is that this age may be a trend, may be an age where it's an in-between age. And if we go and research, which ties back to Susan's question, if we go and research first graders and second graders, I'm going to say it's totally influencing their social identity. But these 5-year-olds whose parents have strict boundaries at home and who constantly told me they're not allowed to, still play traditional outdoor games. And being the tagger and being invited to join tag had a very important part in their social identity.
So I just want to make sure that the subtleties of the sample are clear to the reader, because a different group of kids from a different socioeconomic level in a different situation could be completely
100%.
different, and that there's clear articulation of in what ways their play and the ways they played that involved media did affect their identity or didn't.
So I stated, and I stated a few times in my dissertation, that these children play online but do not interact with one another online. That these
so
children,
hold on one second. Is that an actual finding stated?
Yeah.
That's,
stated.
I just want to hear that clearly.
Yeah, that's stated
Okay.
there in the abstract.
That's
These
good.
children, and that was very interesting.
Yeah, that's a real finding.
So, Can I make a comment about those findings that you were just talking about? Because when I read it, it stood out to me, and I don't remember if I mentioned it to you or I said, well, that's not really about her dissertation, but it's really interesting. When we think about the digital divide, we understand that it's about access, but we also really understand that it's about skills. Your study says to me, it's before skills, it's about socialization. So the digital divide, I just kept thinking about, what if one of those kids didn't have Netflix?
So you asked me that, and I went back to the classroom when I went back, and I checked with them, and I said, who does not have Netflix? And they said, we all have Netflix. I found that fascinating, I found that they all had Netflix was fascinating.
Right.
And that they all watch Netflix and they all talk Netflix was fascinating. And as Lisa pointed out, we should now go to Netflix for funding for postdoc.
If they didn't, that would start that digital divide at socialization.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's just troubling.
So is Netflix a tool, or is it just a version of media?
Netflix, in my understanding of the way that these parents work, Netflix is a safe space. It's what Heifetz calls a haven, a sanctuary, a safe space, because they can monitor what their children are watching, they can choose the movie, they can keep them occupied, and they're not endangering their children by letting them interact with some stranger over there playing on a device. And the only relationship that their child will have is a parasocial relationship with Darth Vader. So I think that for these parents, Netflix is a sanctuary.
This is more of a comment rather than a question. I find your research just fascinating. Some time ago, I twice got to hear a presentation by Vivian Paley.
Oh, she's there.
Yeah.
She's the best.
I figured she was there. I hadn't read your dissertation, but I knew it was there because you wouldn't have been able to get that far. And without her, because she's the foundation. She's the foundation. I met her twice, and I asked her the same question 10 years separately. And the first time I asked her the question, it was, how does technology affect play? And at the time, she really, and this was 1997, say, and she totally dismissed it as not being key to play, which I thought was very interesting. 10 years later, she's at Lesley. I asked her the same question. She couldn't answer the question, which I thought was like tilt, because she couldn't make the connection. However, I think she missed the opportunity to say the following, and maybe she couldn't, at that time, couldn't bring it about in her language. She didn't have a language at that time for that era. And that is what you discuss as play, the socialization, which is the key. It is really the bedrock of socialization is play. And all of the research from Vivian and slightly before say this. and you're saying it again in 2018, I think is hugely key. And she tells a story, I'll be brief, about how when she first started teaching, her first year as a teacher, she worked at a school that had all different kinds of children. These were like 5, 6, 7 years old. But one child came there who was severely disabled. So much so that when his father brought him to the class, he would actually bundle him up because he couldn't walk, and he would lay him on the gym floor and with his blanket and everything. And he really wasn't participating in any of the events or the activities until there was a certain open play where you could play with materials and arts and stuff. But they had a little sample grocery store, and the kids would play grocery. And his father brought a little cart, so he could move around with his hands to the cart. And he's not participating, he's not saying, but he comes up and he, with a lot of difficulty, puts some things in his cart, and he comes up to the other child who's playing cashier, and she tallies up everything, and he gives her the money, and very laboriously he says to her, "Keep the change." And that was stunning because it really made the point that socialization and play is so, so key. So I've been thinking about her ever since. And you're the first time this is my third experience with Vivian through your work.
Okay, well, she's there. And watching the kids and being there, I kept saying to myself what Vivian says, you can't say, you can't play.
Yes.
And
yes.
it's there. Yes. I mean, she inspired me.
Yes.
So let me just piggyback on Brenda, because it goes to findings again. I think what you're surfacing here in just this conversation is a finding is play is critical to socialization, and this reinforces that notion.
Yeah.
And she says that.
And I say that. And I say that children form social interactions through their play.
So regardless of the era, regardless of the technology of that era, that's the bedrock, is how I'm reading it. I'm going to make that assumption.
Yes. I like that assumption. I say that, you don't get old unless you stop playing. Anyone else?
Thank you so much for the rich